Good evening and welcome, humble viewer. Please take this time to find a comfortable chair, perhaps pour yourself a drink, something warm. Outside, the world hums with certainty, with data, with the bright, hard light of accepted fact. But we are not staying here. We are going to a place of deep, cold water and even deeper mystery. A place where the line between what is real and what is imagined becomes as indistinct as the surface of a lake shrouded in mist. Before we begin our descent, perhaps you could leave a note of the time where you are and the place you are listening from. A small, solid point in a known world, a beacon to find our way back to after we have spent some time in the shadows of the unknown. For we are going in search of a monster, or rather the story of a monster which may be the more powerful and enduring creature of the two. To understand the creature, we must first understand its lair. We must go to Scotland, to the raw, wild beauty of the Highlands, to a feature carved into the very bones of the earth. This is the Great Glen, the Glen Moor, a colossal geological fracture, a strike-slip fault that splits the Scottish Highlands in two. It is a scar left over from a tectonic collision some 400 million years ago, a wound in the land that runs for over 60 miles in a perfectly straight, unnervingly straight line from coast to coast. And nestled within this ancient scar, like a string of dark jewels, is a series of lochs. The greatest of these, the dark heart of the Great Glen, is Loch Ness. It is a place of savage, overwhelming scale. The loch is almost 23 miles long, a vast, slender body of water, but its length is not its most terrifying attribute. It is its depth. For most of its length, the loch bed plunges to depths of over 700 feet. At its deepest point, near the ruins of Urquhart Castle, the bottom lies nearly 800 feet below the surface, a depth greater than the height of most of London's skyscrapers. The sides of the loch are not gently sloping banks. They are the sheer, underwater cliffs of a submerged canyon. The volume of water it contains is almost beyond comprehension. Loch Ness holds more fresh water than all the lakes of England and Wales combined. It is a vast, abyssal, inland sea, a world unto itself, hidden in plain sight. The water itself is a collaborator in the mystery. It is not clear and blue. The countless rivers and streams that feed the loch run through hillsides thick with ancient peat. This peat leaches into the water, staining it the color of dark tea or black coffee. The visibility is almost zero. Just a few feet below the surface, the world descends into an impenetrable, amber-black darkness. Sunlight cannot pierce it. A swimmer who drops a white stone will lose sight of it within seconds. It is a perfect veil, a liquid cloak of invisibility. What could live in such a place? The water is also brutally, lethally cold, rarely rising above 40 degrees Fahrenheit even in the height of summer. It is a cold that can kill a man in minutes. This frigid, lightless, peat-stained environment is not an ecosystem as we know it. It is a place of profound sensory deprivation, a place where the normal rules of the surface world do not apply. And around this dark water rises a landscape of brooding, melancholic grandeur. The mountains, stark and treeless, loom over the loch, their slopes often shrouded in shifting veils of mist and rain. The weather is famously fickle, capable of changing from bright sunshine to a violent, white-capped squall in a matter of moments. The silence can be absolute, broken only by the cry of a bird or the lapping of water against a stony shore. It is a landscape that feels ancient, primordial, a place that seems to dwarf the fleeting concerns of human life. It is inherently numinous. It inspires a sense of the sublime, a mixture of awe and terror that has always made the human mind fertile ground for stories of the strange and the monstrous. To stand on the shore of Loch Ness on a quiet, grey afternoon is to feel very small and to feel that you are not entirely alone. It is a place that feels as though it ought to have a secret. For centuries it did, but the secret was not a gentle, shy creature. The original monster of the Great Glen was a thing of pure malice, a demonic entity from the darkest corners of Gaelic folklore. This was the Iach Uisce, the waterhorse. The waterhorse was not a single creature, but a type of supernatural predator said to inhabit the lochs and rivers of Scotland. It was a shapeshifter of terrible power and cunning. It would often appear on the shore as a beautiful, noble steed. its coat gleaming, its saddle and bridle already in place. It was an irresistible temptation to a weary traveler. But the moment a man mounted the horse, its skin would become adhesive, trapping him, and the creature would gallop, with its terrified rider screaming on its back, straight into the deepest part of the loch, where it would drown him, tear his body apart, and devour all of him except for his liver, which would float to the surface as a grim testament to his fate. The water horse could also appear as a handsome man, luring women to their doom, or as a giant bird. It was a creature of pure, elemental evil, a manifestation of the landscape's inherent danger, a warning to children not to wander too close to the dark, cold water. This was the true, ancient monster of Loch Ness. Not a biological curiosity, but a demon. The first written account that would later be co-opted into the modern legend comes from this ancient mythic world. Around the year 565 AD, the Irish missionary Saint Columba, a powerful and charismatic figure who was instrumental in converting the pagan Picts of Scotland to Christianity, was travelling in the region. His life was later chronicled by a man named Adamnan, the 9th abbot of Iona, in a hagiography titled Vita Columbae, or The Life of Saint Columba. The purpose of a hagiography is not objective history. Its purpose is to glorify its subject, to demonstrate their holiness through a series of miracles that prove their divine power. And in the second book of this work, Adamnan tells a remarkable story. Columba and his companions came to the banks of the river Ness, which flows out of the loch. There they encountered a group of Picts burying a man who had just been mauled to death while swimming. The locals told Columba that the man had been attacked by a bestia aquatilis, a water beast, that had dragged him under and savaged him. Unperturbed, Columba ordered one of his own followers, a man named Lugna, to swim across the river to fetch a boat that was moored on the other side. Lugna, obedient to his master, stripped off his clothes and plunged into the water. As he swam into the middle of the river, the beast, which had been lurking on the bottom, suddenly surfaced. Adamnan describes it rushing towards the swimmer with a great roar and its mouth wide open. The Picts on the bank and Columba's own followers were frozen with terror. But Columba, calm and resolute, raised his holy hand, made the sign of the cross in the air, and, invoking the name of God, commanded the creature in a thunderous voice, "Go no further, do not touch the man, go back at once." At the sound of the saint's voice, the beast, as if pulled back by ropes, immediately halted its attack and fled, diving back into the depths. The monks and the pagan Picts, witnessing this incredible display of power, gave glory to God, and the swimmer returned to them, unharmed. For over 1,000 years, this story was understood for what it was, a miracle story, a classic example of a saint demonstrating the power of the Christian God over the forces of nature and the demonic entities of the pagan world. The water beast, like the water horse, was a symbol of the untamed, unchristianized wilderness. Columba's triumph was a triumph of faith over chaos. But in the 20th century, this ancient tale would be dusted off, reinterpreted, and presented as the very first historical sighting of the Loch Ness monster, the foundational piece of evidence in a new, modern myth. The demonic predator was about to be rebranded as a reclusive, prehistoric survivor. The catalyst for this transformation was not a sighting, but a road. For most of its history, Loch Ness was remote and inaccessible. The northern shore was served by a rough, winding track, a military road built by General Wade in the 18th century. It offered only fleeting, difficult glimpses of the water. But in 1933, a new, modern road, the A82, was completed. It was a marvel of engineering, carved into the hillside along the loch's northern edge. For the first time, this new road provided a clear, continuous, and elevated panorama of the loch's surface, accessible to anyone with a motorcar. The number of potential observers and the amount of time they spent looking at the water skyrocketed almost overnight. The world of 1933 was also a world primed for a mystery. It was the era of the Great Depression, a time of global anxiety and hardship, but it was also the golden age of mass media. Newspapers, radio, and the cinema had created a global popular culture, and the public was hungry for escapism, for adventure, for stories of wonder that could distract from the grim realities of daily life. The discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb a decade earlier and the wave of Egyptomania that followed had shown the immense public appetite for real-life mysteries. The stage was set, the audience was seated. All that was needed was a spark. That spark came on April 14th, 1933. A local couple, Mr. and Mrs. Aldi Mackay, the respected proprietors of the Drumna Drochit Hotel, were driving home along the new road. As they looked out across the placid surface of the loch, they saw something extraordinary. The water began to churn and boil, and a huge black object, which Mrs. Mackay later described as resembling a whale-like fish or a beast, began rolling and plunging in the water, sending waves crashing towards the shore. They watched, transfixed, for several minutes before the creature submerged and the loch returned to its calm, inscrutable state. The Mackays were respectable, sober people, not given to flights of fancy. They told their story to a friend, Alex Campbell, who happened to be the local water bailiff and a part-time correspondent for the Inverness Courier. Alex Campbell is a crucial figure in this story. He was a man of the loch, deeply knowledgeable about its moods and its natural inhabitants. He listened to the Mackay's story, and it resonated with the old legends he had heard his entire life. On May 2nd, 1933, he wrote an article for the Courier. It was a restrained piece, but it contained a single fateful word. Describing the creature as having a protuberance that rose from the water, he wrote that the sighting had opened up a fascinating problem for local naturalists. He then stated that the loch was credited with being the home of a fearsome-looking monster. That was it. The word was out. Monster. It was a word that transformed a strange sighting into a sensational story. The story was quickly picked up by the national press in London. The age of mass media seized upon the tale with glee. But it was a second sighting, just a few months later, that would truly ignite the global phenomenon and cement the creature's iconic image in the public consciousness. On July 22, 1933, a London businessman named George Spicer and his wife were driving along the road near the loch. As they rounded a bend, they slammed on their brakes in utter disbelief. Crossing the road in front of them, heading towards the loch, was what Mr. Spicer would later describe as the nearest approach to a dragon or prehistoric animal that I have ever seen in my life. He described a creature with a huge, lumbering body, no visible limbs, and a long, thick neck, about 6 to 8 feet in length, that moved up and down in an undulating, scenic railway motion. In the middle of its long neck, it seemed to be carrying something which Spicer speculated was a lamb or some other animal. The creature, which they saw for only a few seconds, slid across the road, crashed through the undergrowth, and disappeared, presumably into the loch. The Spicer sighting was a bombshell. It was a land sighting. It came from a respectable, educated man, a visitor with no knowledge of the local folklore. And most importantly, it provided a distinct, unforgettable image, the long neck. This was the moment the creature ceased to be a vague beast or whale-like fish and began its transformation into a living plesiosaur, a survivor from the age of the dinosaurs. The story was published in the national papers and the floodgates opened. The world became obsessed. The Loch Ness monster, or Nessie as it was affectionately nicknamed, was born. The immediate aftermath was a media circus of a kind the world had never seen before. Reporters from London, from America, from all over the globe descended on the small, quiet villages around the loch. Hotels were booked solid. The roads became jammed with tourists, all armed with binoculars and cameras, hoping to catch a glimpse of the creature and claim a piece of the glory. Adventurers and big game hunters arrived, eager to be the first to capture or kill the beast. Marmaduke Wetherell, a flamboyant hunter and filmmaker, arrived sponsored by the Daily Mail newspaper, vowing to track the monster down. He soon found large footprints on the shore, which he claimed belonged to a very powerful, soft-footed animal about 20 feet long. Casts were made, and the news was triumphantly reported, only for zoologists from the Natural History Museum to later reveal that the tracks had been made with a dried hippopotamus foot, likely from an umbrella stand or ashtray, a deliberate and embarrassing hoax. But the hoax did nothing to dampen the enthusiasm. The monster craze of 1933 and 1934 was in full swing. The loch was no longer a remote Scottish lake. It was a global stage, a theatre of mystery. Every ripple on the water, every floating log, every stray seal that swam in from the sea was interpreted as a potential sighting. The local people, who had lived with their dark, quiet loch for centuries, suddenly found themselves at the centre of a worldwide spectacle. A new kind of monster had truly been born, a monster of media, of tourism, of human hope and human gullibility, and this new creature, made of ink and film and whispered stories, was proving to be far more powerful and far more real than the flesh and blood animal it was supposed to be. The search was just beginning. The fuse had been lit. The monster craze of 1933 had transformed a remote Scottish loch into a global sensation, a theatre of possibility where the mundane rules of the 20th century seemed to have been suspended. The story of a prehistoric survivor lurking in the peat-stained depths had captured the world's imagination, fueled by a potent mixture of genuine eyewitness accounts, media hype, and a deep-seated human desire to believe that the world was still a place of wonder and enchantment. But for the legend of Nessie to survive beyond this initial, feverish flash of public excitement, it needed more than just anecdotal tales and newspaper headlines. It needed an image. It needed a photograph. It needed a piece of seemingly irrefutable, scientific evidence that could be held, examined, and endlessly reproduced. An icon that would forever burn the creature's form into the collective mind of the world. In April of 1934, that icon appeared, and it would become the single most famous, most influential, and ultimately most controversial photograph in the entire history of cryptozoology. The man credited with capturing this extraordinary image was Robert Kenneth Wilson, a highly respected London gynecologist. Wilson was not a monster hunter. He was, by all accounts, a sober, professional man, not given to seeking publicity. According to his story, he was visiting the area in April 1934, hoping to photograph birds. He was driving along the shore of the loch when he noticed a commotion in the water some distance away. He stopped his car, grabbed his camera, a quarter-plate camera with a telephoto lens, and rushed to the water's edge. He saw a dark object moving in the water and managed to take 4 photographs before it submerged and disappeared. He was so excited that the first 2 photos were badly blurred, but 2 others were clear. Wilson, being a modest and publicity-shy man, did not want his name associated with the sensationalism of the monster hunt. He gave the plates to a friend, who in turn delivered them to the Daily Mail newspaper in London. On April 21, 1934, the Mail published one of the images under the headline, "London Surgeon's Photo of the Monster." And the world stopped. The image was breathtaking. There, rising from the calm, dark water of the loch, was a slender, swan-like neck and a small reptilian head turned slightly to the left. The water around its base was disturbed by gentle, concentric ripples, giving a sense of movement and life. The lighting was perfect, the composition stark and elegant. It was exactly what the public had been primed to see. It was the Spicer sighting made manifest. It was a plesiosaur. The photograph, which quickly became known simply as the surgeon's photograph, was an immediate worldwide sensation. It was reprinted in newspapers and magazines across the globe. It was hailed as the proof that skeptics had been demanding. The fact that it was taken by a respected medical doctor, a man of science with no apparent motive to fabricate such a story, lent it an almost unassailable credibility. This was not a blurry image of a distant splash. This was a clear, focused portrait of the creature itself. The surgeon's photograph became the definitive image of Nessie, the archetypal representation that would define the monster for all time. For 60 years, it would stand as the single most powerful piece of evidence for the existence of an unknown animal in Loch Ness. The publication of the photo solidified the legend and transformed the nature of the search. The era of amateur monster spotting began to give way to a more organized, more scientific approach. In 1934, Sir Edward Mountain, a wealthy businessman, sponsored the first large-scale, organized expedition to the loch. He hired a team of 20 men, equipped with binoculars and cameras, and stationed them at strategic points around the loch for 5 weeks. They were paid a bonus for every sighting. The expedition produced several photographs and a short piece of film footage, but the images were indistinct, showing distant splashes and V-shaped wakes that could have been caused by boats or natural phenomena. The results were inconclusive, but the expedition itself set a precedent. The hunt for Nessie was becoming a serious, well-funded endeavour. Throughout the 1930s, 40s and 50s, the sightings continued, a steady trickle of reports from locals, tourists and dedicated monster hunters. People reported seeing long necks, multiple humps moving in a line through the water, and large, dark shapes just beneath the surface. But tangible evidence remained elusive. The Second World War brought a temporary halt to the hunt, as the nation turned its attention to a more immediate and dangerous kind of monster. But after the war, interest slowly began to revive. The story of Nessie had become an indelible part of modern folklore, a mystery that refused to die. The 1960s marked the beginning of a new, more technologically sophisticated era in the search. In 1961, the Loch Ness Investigation Bureau, LNIB, was formed. It was a volunteer organisation, a dedicated army of amateur researchers who were determined to solve the mystery once and for all. They set up observation posts, manned by volunteers who would spend their holidays staring at the water through powerful binoculars. They used cine cameras with telephoto lenses to constantly monitor the surface. The LNIB brought a new level of dedication and organisation to the hunt. They collected hundreds of eyewitness accounts, meticulously cataloguing the details of each sighting. They also captured several pieces of film footage, the most famous of which was the Dinsdale film. In 1960, just before the official formation of the LNIB, an aeronautical engineer named Tim Dinsdale, on the last day of a solo expedition, captured about a minute of footage from a high vantage point above the loch. The film shows a large, dark, reddish-brown object moving across the water, leaving a powerful wake behind it. At one point, it appears to turn. Dinsdale was convinced he had filmed the monster. The film was sent to the Royal Air Force's Joint Air Reconnaissance Intelligence Centre, JARIC, for analysis. The official JARIC report concluded, astonishingly, that the object was probably animate and was not a surface vessel. For believers, the Dinsdale film, alongside the surgeon's photograph, became a cornerstone of their evidence. As technology advanced, so did the methods of the hunters. The search moved from the surface to the depths. The 1960s and 70s saw a series of expeditions that employed a new and powerful tool: sonar. Sonar, or sound navigation and ranging, offered the tantalizing possibility of seeing through the loch's impenetrable, peat-stained water. Teams from various British universities began to conduct sonar sweeps of the loch. In 1968, a team from the University of Birmingham detected a large object moving at a speed of several knots at a depth of over 600 feet. The sonar operator, a man named D. Gordon Tucker, was so impressed that he stated, "The high rate of ascent and descent seems to indicate a living creature." In 1969, a submersible research vessel named the Viperfish was brought to the loch. During one of its dives, its sonar picked up a large, moving target. The next year, another submersible, the Pisces, captained by a man named Dan Taylor, had a similar sonar contact. The evidence was tantalizing, but always frustratingly ambiguous. The sonar could be detecting shoals of fish, unusual water currents, or even ghost echoes caused by the loch's steep underwater cliffs. The culmination of this technological approach came in the 1970s with the work of the Academy of Applied Science, a Boston-based organization led by Dr. Robert Rines, a lawyer, inventor, and patent expert. Rines brought a new level of American funding and technological sophistication to the search. His method involved using a combination of sonar and specially designed strobe-lit underwater cameras. The idea was to anchor a sonar unit in the water and have it trigger the camera whenever a large object passed by. In August 1972, their equipment got a hit. The sonar detected a large object and the camera fired. When the film was developed, it revealed a series of murky, indistinct, but deeply intriguing images. One, after computer enhancement, seemed to show a large, rhomboid or diamond-shaped flipper about 4 to 6 feet in length. The image was astonishingly similar to the fossilized flippers of a plesiosaur. Another image, taken in 1975, was even more sensational. It became known as the gargoyle head photo. After enhancement, it appeared to show the head, long neck, and upper torso of a large horned creature, its mouth agape. The Rhines photographs caused a storm of excitement and controversy. They were published in prestigious journals like Nature. Sir Peter Scott, a renowned naturalist and son of the Antarctic explorer Robert Falcon Scott, became a passionate believer. He even gave the creature a formal scientific name, Nessiteras rhombopteryx, meaning the Ness wonder with the diamond-shaped fin. For a brief, shining moment, it seemed as though the mystery was on the verge of being solved, that Nessie was about to move from the realm of cryptozoology into the realm of accepted zoology. The flipper and the head, combined with the surgeon's photo and the Dinsdale film, seemed to form a compelling body of evidence. But even as the case for Nessie seemed to be reaching its zenith, the foundations of the legend were beginning to crumble. Skepticism, which had always been present, began to gain a stronger foothold, armed with more rigorous scientific analysis. The sonar contacts were re-examined and found to be less conclusive than first thought. The Dinsdale film, upon closer inspection, could be interpreted as showing a small boat, perhaps a fisherman's dinghy, its appearance distorted by distance and heat haze. The Rhines photos were heavily criticized. The flipper photo was accused of being a picture of the loch bottom, its features enhanced and overinterpreted by wishful thinking. The gargoyle head was so murky and ambiguous that critics argued it could be anything: a tree stump, a trick of the light, or even a deliberate fake. The scientific establishment remained deeply unconvinced. The biological case against Nessie was simply too strong. How could a breeding population of large, air-breathing reptiles survive, undetected, in a cold, nutrient-poor loch? What would they eat? The biomass of fish in the loch was thought to be far too small to support such large predators. How would they have survived the last ice age, which would have frozen the loch solid? The questions were piling up, and the evidence, when placed under a harsh, skeptical light, seemed to be evaporating. The final, devastating blow to the legend came in the 1990s, and it struck directly at the icon, the sacred image that had started it all, the surgeon's photograph. For 60 years, the photo had been the bedrock of the Nessie myth. But its story had always contained a few nagging inconsistencies. And then, in 1994, a man named Christian Sperling, on his deathbed at the age of 90, gave a final confession that would unravel the entire affair. He revealed that the surgeon's photograph was a deliberate, elaborate, and brilliantly executed hoax. The mastermind of the hoax, according to Sperling, was none other than Marmaduke Wetherell, the same big game hunter who had been publicly humiliated by the Daily Mail over the fake hippopotamus foot tracks in 1933. Burning for revenge against the newspaper that had ridiculed him, Wetherell hatched a plot. He enlisted the help of his son-in-law, Christian Sperling, who was a skilled model maker. Sperling constructed the monster by taking a 14-inch toy submarine and modifying it. He sculpted the long neck and head out of wood putty and attached it to the top of the submarine. They then took their model to a quiet cove on the loch and photographed it, creating the iconic image of the creature rising from the water. To lend credibility to their hoax, they needed a respectable, unimpeachable frontman. They recruited Dr. Robert Wilson, a friend of Wetherell's, who agreed to pass the photograph off as his own on the condition that his name would eventually be cleared. The plan worked more perfectly than they could have ever imagined. The photograph, born of a petty desire for revenge, became a global icon of mystery, its secret kept for 6 decades. Sperling's confession was a seismic event. The bedrock of the Nessie legend had been revealed to be a lie. It was a fake, a clever trick played on a hopeful world. For many, this was the end of the story. The monster was dead, killed not by a hunter's harpoon, but by the deathbed confession of an old man. The great 20th century myth, it seemed, had finally been debunked. But the confession raised an even more profound question. If the most famous photograph was a fake, what about the hundreds of other sightings? What about the sonar contacts? What about the heartfelt, sincere accounts of ordinary people who claimed, with absolute conviction, that they had seen something strange and inexplicable in the dark waters of Loch Ness? Had they all been mistaken? Were they all liars? Or was it possible that the hoax, paradoxically, had been created to imitate a creature that was already there. The death of the photograph did not kill the mystery, it simply made it deeper, more complex, and more human. The search was not over, it had just entered a new, more uncertain and more introspective phase. The surgeon's photograph is a ghost. The sonar pings have faded into silence. The expeditions have packed up their cameras and gone home. And we are left here, on the cold, dark shore, the mystery not solved, but deepened. The scaffolding of the modern legend, the hoaxes, the headlines, the scientific debates, has fallen away, and what remains is something older, something more primal and far more unsettling. We are left alone with the creature itself. Not the affectionate, cartoonish Nessie of the tourist shops, but the thing in the water, the original terror. A being defined not by evidence, but by its profound and terrifying absence, by the sheer, crushing blackness of its home, and by the chilling possibilities of what that darkness might conceal. Let us try, for a moment, to truly imagine it. Let us set aside the plesiosaur theory with its neat, prehistoric, almost comfortable explanation. Let us instead confront the creature as the witnesses described it, in all its horrifying and contradictory forms. Let us descend into the water and into the fear. The most persistent image is the neck, a long, slender, serpentine neck rising silently from the placid surface of the loch. Think of the unnaturalness of it. In a world of horizontal lines, the horizon, the surface of the water, a vertical element appears, a living periscope, grey or black, its skin glistening and wet. It has no discernible features, no eyes that you can see, no mouth. It is just a column of flesh, moving with a slow, deliberate grace that is utterly alien. It does not behave like any known animal. It simply rises, surveys the world with an intelligence we cannot comprehend, and then, without a sound, retracts, slipping back beneath the black mirror of the loch, leaving nothing behind but a vortex of swirling water and a profound sense of violation in the mind of the observer. The world has been trespassed upon by something that does not belong. But this is only one of its forms. Consider the descriptions of its body. It is not the graceful, streamlined form of a reptile. Witnesses speak of a vast, slug-like protoplasmic mass, a colossal, humped thing, like a chain of submerged hills moving with a slow, inexorable power. George Spicer, in his famous 1933 sighting, described it as being like a scenic railway, a series of undulations. Others speak of a body like an upturned boat, a great, dark, featureless bulk, black and slug-like, churning the water into a greasy, oily wake. There is a profound horror in this formlessness. A shark, a crocodile. These are terrifying, but they are known quantities. They have teeth, eyes, fins. They are part of our world. But this is something else. It is a thing of raw, undifferentiated flesh, a creature without a proper shape, a being that seems to exist on the very edge of biological possibility. It is the horror of the amorphous, the terror of the thing that has no name and no proper form. It is a living piece of the abyss that has somehow risen to the surface. And what of its skin? Witnesses describe it as being like that of a snail or an eel, black, grey, mottled. But the most unsettling descriptions speak of a texture that is rough, wart-like, bristly. A hide that is not smooth and reptilian, but coarse and fungoid, like the bark of a dead, waterlogged tree. Imagine touching such a thing. Imagine the cold, rough, yielding texture of it. It suggests decay. It suggests something that is not merely ancient, but ancient in a sick, unhealthy way. A being that has lived for millennia in absolute darkness and absolute cold. Its skin becoming something strange and corrupted, a living tapestry of rot and age. Then there is the sound, or the lack of it. The creature is almost always described as being utterly silent. Its appearances are ghostly, spectral. It emerges from the depths without a splash, moves through the water without a sound, and submerges without a trace. This silence is perhaps its most terrifying attribute. It implies a mastery of its environment that is absolute. It is not an animal that thrashes or bellows. It is a silent, watchful presence, a being of immense power that has no need to announce itself. But on the rare occasions that a sound is reported, it is deeply unsettling. St. Columba's beast was said to have let out a great roar. Other, more modern accounts speak of a strange hissing or puffing sound, like the venting of some vast subterranean lung. It is the sound of something ancient and biological, but utterly alien, breathing the air of our world for a few moments before returning to its own. Let us consider its intelligence. This is not a dumb brute. This is not a simple, prehistoric relic, mindlessly swimming in its ancient home. The creature's behavior suggests a cunning, almost malevolent intelligence. It seems to have an uncanny awareness of being watched. So many sightings describe the creature appearing at a great distance, only to submerge the moment a camera is raised or another person's attention is drawn to it. It toys with observers. It reveals just enough of itself to shatter their sense of reality, but never enough to be captured, to be categorized, to be understood. It is a master of the tease. It is a performer in a theater of its own creation, and we are its unwilling audience. This implies not just animal cunning, but a form of consciousness that is actively, deliberately elusive. It knows we are here, and it does not want to be known. It is the ultimate voyeur, watching the watchers from the safety of its abyssal home, a silent, unseen lord surveying its domain and the strange, fleeting creatures that scurry along its shores. And we must confront the possibility of its malevolence. We have softened the legend. We have made Nessie a gentle, shy giant, a beloved mascot. But the old stories, the roots of the legend, tell of something far darker. The Whisker, the water horse, was a predator. It was a killer of men, a devourer of flesh. The beast that attacked St. Columba's follower was not a curious animal. It was a hungry one. It was rushing with its mouth wide open. Modern accounts rarely speak of direct attacks, but there is a persistent, unsettling undercurrent. The Spicer sighting included the detail of the creature carrying an animal in its mouth. Other stories, often whispered in the local pubs rather than reported in the papers, tell of sheep disappearing from the lochside pastures, of dogs that have gone too close to the water and never returned. And there is the simple, terrifying logic of its size. A creature of such immense bulk would require a vast amount of food to sustain itself. The fish in the loch are not enough. What then does it eat? Does it lie in torpor on the bottom for years, for decades, its metabolism slowed to a near standstill, only rising to feed when some primal hunger stirs in its vast, cold body? And when it does rise, is it content with salmon and trout, or does it crave something more? The legend taps into our deepest, most primal human fear, the fear of being eaten. The fear of being pulled down from the bright, sunlit world of the living into a dark, watery grave, to be torn apart and consumed by something ancient and unknowable. Now let us imagine encountering it, not a distant glimpse of a hump or a neck, but a true, close encounter. Imagine you are in a small boat in the middle of the loch on a still, grey day. The water is like black glass, the silence is absolute, and then directly beneath you, the water begins to move. Not a ripple, but a great, slow, oily swelling, as if something of impossible size is shifting in the depths. A foul, swamp-like odor, a smell of ancient decay and wet earth rises to the surface. And then the black water breaks. But it is not a head or a neck that emerges. It is a part of its back, a vast, dark island of glistening, wart-like flesh, wider than your boat is long. It rises slowly, silently, water cascading from its sides. You see no head, no tail, no fins. Just this immense, living piece of geography, this fragment of a creature whose true size you cannot possibly comprehend. It is so close you could reach out and touch it. The sheer, mind-breaking scale of it paralyzes you. Your brain refuses to process what your eyes are seeing. It is a living mountain, a being that defies every known law of biology. And then, as silently as it came, it sinks, creating a huge, slow vortex that spins your small boat around. You are left alone in the silence, your heart hammering against your ribs, your sanity frayed to a thread. You have seen a truth that you can never unsee, a truth that you can never explain. Who would believe you? They would say you saw a floating log, a gas bubble, a trick of the light. But you know what you saw. You saw the thing that lives in the dark. This is the true horror of the Loch Ness monster. It is not the fear of a simple animal, it is the fear of the unknown made flesh. The loch itself is a symbol of the subconscious mind, a vast, dark, deep part of our world that we cannot penetrate, where ancient things still stir. The creature is the embodiment of everything we have tried to suppress, to pave over, to explain away with the bright, hard light of science. It is a reminder that the world is not a safe, predictable, fully mapped place. It is a reminder that there are still dark corners, still abysses, still things that slip through the nets of our understanding. The creepiness of Nessie lies in its defiance of categories. It is not living or dead, not reptile or mammal, not natural or supernatural. It is simply other. And in our safe, well-lit, modern world, there is nothing more terrifying than encountering something that is fundamentally, incomprehensibly other. The fear of Loch Ness is the fear that we are not, in fact, the masters of this world. It is the fear that in the darkness beneath our feet, something older, bigger, and infinitely more patient than we are is waiting. And it is the fear that, sometimes, it comes up for a look. We have felt the primal chill of the creature in the water. We have imagined its formless, silent, impossible presence, a being of nightmare logic drawn from the deepest, blackest parts of the loch and the human mind. But the story of the Loch Ness monster, the true reason it continues to hold us in its thrall, is not just about the fear of a single, hypothetical beast. It is about something deeper, something more fundamental to our modern condition. It is about the brutal, grinding, and ultimately tragic collision between two irreconcilable ways of seeing the world. The ancient world of myth, wonder, and the unshakable certainty of the eyewitness, and the modern world of science, skepticism, and the cold, unforgiving authority of empirical data. The final, most enduring brutality of the Loch Ness story is the relentless, systematic war that science has waged against the monster. A war designed not just to disprove its existence, but to deconstruct and pathologize the very human need to believe in it. It is the story of how our modern world methodically dismantles its own monsters, leaving us safer perhaps, but also immeasurably poorer and haunted by the profound, echoing silence where a great mystery used to be. The scientific case against Nessie is not just a collection of counter-arguments. It is a fortress, a citadel of logic built brick by meticulous brick over decades of research, its foundations resting on the bedrock of physics, biology, and geology. It is a case so comprehensive, so logically sound, and so overwhelmingly powerful that from a purely rational standpoint, it leaves the creature with no water to swim in, no air to breathe, no food to eat, and no time in which to exist. The first and most insurmountable wall in this fortress, the one that crushes the legend under the simple, brutal weight of mathematics, is the food chain. The biomass of any stable ecosystem is a pyramid. At the bottom is a vast, sprawling base of primary producers, the plants that capture energy from the sun. This base supports a significantly smaller mass of herbivores, which in turn supports an even smaller, more precarious mass of predators at the peak. Loch Ness is what limnologists classify as an oligotrophic loch. This is a scientific term for what is, in essence, a liquid desert. Its water is profoundly cold. Its depths are starved of light, and its chemical composition is nutrient poor. As a result, there is very little plankton, the foundation of the aquatic food chain. This scarcity at the bottom means the entire pyramid above it is stunted and impoverished. The most generous scientific estimates, based on extensive netting and sonar surveys, place the total fish biomass in the entire vast expanse of Loch Ness at around 20 to 30 tons. That number seems large until you perform the cold, cruel arithmetic of survival. A single 10-ton plesiosaur-like creature, a warm-blooded, active predator, would require a staggering amount of energy to survive in that frigid water. Conservative estimates suggest it would need to consume at least 10% of its body weight per day, which amounts to a ton of fish. A more generous estimate for a cold-blooded reptile might lower that to 200 kilograms per day. Even with this lower number, a single animal would consume over 70 tons of fish a year, wiping out the entire fish population of the loch more than twice over. And the legend does not speak of a single immortal creature. For the species to survive for millennia, there must be a viable breeding population, a group of at least 10 to 20 individuals, and likely more. Such a population would require thousands of tons of fish per year. They would have eaten themselves into extinction within their first year. The loch simply cannot support them. It is a biological bank account with insufficient funds to support such a magnificent predator. The monster, from the standpoint of energetics, is bankrupt. The second great wall of the fortress is the simple, inescapable problem of respiration. The classic image of Nessie, the image burned into our minds by the fraudulent surgeon's photograph and countless eyewitness accounts, is that of a reptile, a plesiosaur. Reptiles are air breathers. Even if we imagine it is a mammal, like a strange, long-necked whale or seal, it must still breathe air. It would need to surface regularly, multiple times an hour, every single day, for its entire life. Now, consider a breeding population of 20 such animals. That would mean hundreds, if not thousands of surfacings every single day. The loch would be a constant parade of rising necks and heads. They would be as common a sight as the local sheep or the tourist ferries. Yet the entire legend of Nessie is predicated on the extreme rarity of sightings. The creature is defined by its elusiveness, its ghostly, fleeting appearances. The monster cannot simultaneously be a shy, reclusive creature that is almost never seen and a member of a viable breeding population of large, air-breathing vertebrates. The two ideas are a brutal, irreconcilable contradiction. The logic is a cage with no escape. To exist, they must be seen, but their legend depends entirely on the fact that they are not. The third wall, and perhaps the most definitive, is the wall of deep time, the history of the loch itself, written in rock and ice. The Great Glen, the colossal geological fault in which Loch Ness rests, was ground zero for the last great glacial period. Just 20,000 years ago, a mere blink in geological time, the entire region was buried under a glacier over a mile thick. The weight and grinding, scouring power of this ice is almost impossible to comprehend. It would have carved the loch bed clean of all life, and of course, frozen it absolutely solid. There is no possibility, zero, that a population of large, prehistoric reptiles could have survived this cataclysmic deep freeze. So the theory must be that they recolonized the loch from the sea after the ice retreated some 10,000 years ago. But this presents its own set of insurmountable problems. The River Ness, the waterway that connects the loch to the Moray Firth and the North Sea, is, for much of its length, shallow, winding, and obstructed by a series of weirs. It is difficult to imagine a creature the size of a bus, or even a small population of them, navigating this route undetected. Furthermore, and more damningly, if a relic population of plesiosaurs had survived in the oceans of the world until just 10,000 years ago, we would expect to find their fossils everywhere in recent marine sediments. Their bones would be a common discovery for fishermen and paleontologists alike. But there is nothing. The fossil record is utterly, completely silent. Plesiosaurs vanish from the rock alongside the dinosaurs 65 million years ago. To believe in Nessie is to believe in a ghost that has left no trace of its passing for an expanse of time that makes all of human history seem like a single heartbeat. From the perspective of geology and paleontology, the monster's timeline is not just improbable, it is a fantasy. Faced with this mountain of contradictory, annihilating evidence, the focus of the scientific inquiry performs a chilling pivot. It turns its cold, analytical gaze away from the water and onto the witness. The central question for the skeptic is no longer what is in the loch, it is why do people see things in the loch? And the answers they provide are, in their own way, as fascinating, as complex, and as brutal as the monster itself. The scientific explanation for Nessie is a grand tapestry woven from the threads of misidentification, optical illusion, and the deep, strange, and often flawed architecture of human psychology. This is where the true brutality of the scientific method reveals itself. It does not just seek to disprove the phenomenon, it seeks to deconstruct the observer, to explain away their profound personal experience as a common cognitive error. The first line of this psychological assault is misidentification. The vast majority of sightings, skeptics argue with formidable evidence, can be readily explained by the misidentification of known objects or phenomena, their appearance distorted by distance, weather, and expectation. A line of swimming birds, such as cormorants or goosanders, flying low over the water or diving for fish in unison, can look remarkably like a series of humps moving through the water. A deer, a surprisingly strong swimmer, attempting to cross the loch with only its head and antlers or neck visible above the water, can create a startlingly convincing long neck illusion from a distance. A stray seal, which can and does occasionally swim into the loch from the sea with its sleek head and bobbing motion, could easily be mistaken for something more exotic by an observer unfamiliar with its appearance. The list goes on. Floating logs, often blackened by the peat-stained water, can surface and submerge with the waves. Mats of vegetation, buoyed to the surface by decomposition gases from the loch bed, can create large, dark, moving shapes. And the most common culprit of all, the V-shaped wakes of the many boats that traverse the loch, which can persist and interact with each other for a long time on a calm day, creating the illusion of a powerful, unseen object moving just beneath the surface. The world, science argues, is full of ordinary things that can look extraordinary under the right circumstances. Then there are the optical illusions created by the unique and hostile environment of the loch itself. Loch Ness is a natural trickster, a stage designed for deception. Its dark, featureless, monochromatic surface provides no sense of scale, making it incredibly difficult for the human brain to judge the size and distance of any object upon it. A small bird can appear as large as a boat, a distant log as colossal as a whale. Temperature inversions, which are common over the vast, cold body of water, create a layer of warm air sitting on top of a layer of cold air. This acts like a lens, bending and distorting light rays, causing objects to appear to shimmer, stretch, to hover above the surface, or to be magnified in a strange, unsettling mirage. A simple wind slick, a patch of calm water created by a localized gust of wind, can appear to the eye as a solid, dark, elongated object moving against the grain of the waves, a classic hump sighting. The environment itself is a co-conspirator in the mystery, constantly creating phantoms for the hopeful eye to seize upon. But the most powerful and most personally brutal explanation lies in the labyrinth of human psychology. The human mind, science tells us, is not a passive recorder of objective reality. It is an active, often unreliable storyteller, hardwired by evolution to find patterns, to create agency and meaning where there is only chaos. This is the phenomenon of pareidolia, the tendency to perceive significant, familiar shapes, like faces or animals, in random or ambiguous stimuli. It is why we see a man in the moon or animals in the clouds. The ever-changing, wave-dappled, light-shifting surface of Loch Ness is a giant, dynamic Rorschach test the size of a county. A person who travels to the loch expecting to see a monster, their mind already filled with the iconic images of long necks and humped backs, is psychologically primed to interpret any ambiguous shape, any strange ripple, as a confirmation of that belief. This is the seductive trap of confirmation bias, the powerful and universal human tendency to seek out, interpret, and favor information that confirms one's pre-existing beliefs. Once the idea of the monster was planted in the global consciousness in 1933, it created a self-perpetuating cycle of belief. People went to the loch looking for Nessie, and so they found Nessie over and over again, in the waves, in the logs, in the swimming birds, in the tricks of the light, and most of all, in the deep, hopeful recesses of their own minds. Science, therefore, does not just dismiss the monster, it pathologizes the witness. The sincere, heartfelt testimony of a person who is utterly convinced they have seen something inexplicable is reframed as a fascinating but ultimately unremarkable case study in the fallibility of human perception and memory. The witness is not a liar, but they are unreliable. They are a victim of their own flawed senses, their own suggestibility, their own deep-seated, pattern-seeking brain. The wonder is stripped away and replaced with a clinical diagnosis. The awe is explained away as a cognitive glitch. This is the true, cold cruelty of the scientific viewpoint. It doesn't just kill the monster in the water, it attempts to kill the magic in the mind. It tells us that the feeling of profound mystery we experience when we look out over that dark, forbidding water is not a window into a hidden reality, but a reflection of a flaw in our own internal programming. This scientific war of attrition culminated in the great, high-tech, monster-slaying expeditions of the late 20th and early 21st centuries. In 1987, Operation Deep Scan represented a massive show of force. A fleet of 20 boats, laden with the most sophisticated sonar of the day, arrayed themselves in a single line and moved down the loch, a curtain of sound designed to detect anything larger than a salmon. They found a few large, tantalizing sonar contacts, including one object described by the lead scientist as being larger than a shark but smaller than a whale. But ultimately, the results were frustratingly inconclusive. The contacts possibly being dense shoals of fish or even waterlogged debris. Then, in 2003, the BBC funded what was intended to be the final, definitive survey. Using an array of 600 separate sonar beams linked to a global positioning system to ensure every cubic inch of the loch was surveyed, they swept the depths for any sign of a large, living creature. They found nothing. The final report was blunt, a death certificate for a dream. We went to Loch Ness with an open mind, and we came away convinced there is no monster. More recently, in 2018, the most futuristic weapon of all was deployed, environmental DNA. A global team of geneticists conducted a massive eDNA survey, collecting hundreds of water samples from all depths of the loch and analyzing the genetic material shed by every creature living within it. The results were a litany of absences. They found no DNA from any large reptile, no shark DNA, no sturgeon DNA. The only surprising result was a large quantity of eel DNA, leading the lead scientist to speculate, almost as a wistful afterthought, that perhaps the monster could be a giant mutated eel, a theory that satisfied no one. The final verdict of science is a resounding, deafening, and absolute silence. The monster is not there, and so the war is over. Science has won a total victory. The fortress of skepticism stands, its walls unbreached, its logic unassailable. The monster has been slain by sonar, by DNA sequencing, by the cold, hard laws of biology, physics, and geology. But has it? We are left in a strange, paradoxical peace, a world that has, for all intents and purposes, proven that there is no monster in Loch Ness. And yet the idea of the monster is more powerful, more vibrant, and more globally recognized than ever before. The tourist industry along the loch's shores thrives, an economy built on an absence. People still flock to the water's edge from every corner of the earth, their eyes filled with a stubborn, illogical hope. They still stare out at the dark, inscrutable water, willing it, daring it to give up its secret. The definitive scientific surveys published their negative results, and the world collectively shrugged and continued to buy the Nessie-shaped salt and pepper shakers. This reveals the final, most profound truth of the Loch Ness story, a truth that science, in its brutal efficiency, cannot touch. The monster has transcended the need for proof. It has evolved. It has shed its mortal biological coil and become a self-sustaining myth. An idea so powerful that it is now immune to the weapons of logic and fact. It exists because we need it to exist. In a world that feels increasingly mapped, measured, logged, and stripped of all its mystery, a world where every square inch of the globe is visible on a satellite image, Loch Ness has become one of the last great sanctuaries of the unknown. It is a nature preserve, not for a prehistoric animal, but for the human capacity for wonder itself. The scientific brutalism that sought to kill the monster has, paradoxically, only served to reveal the incredible, obstinate resilience of belief. It has shown that even in the face of overwhelming, irrefutable, logical proof, the human heart will stubbornly cling to the possibility of magic. We may know in our rational minds that there is nothing there, but we go to the loch anyway, not because we truly expect to see a monster, but because we need to feel that it is still possible to see one. The silence from the depths is not an absence, it is an invitation to believe, just for a moment, that the world is bigger, stranger, and more wonderful than we are told. And in that sense, the monster is not dead. It is, and will forever be, waiting for us in the dark, cold water. And so, our journey is over. The hunt is over. The great sonar curtain has fallen. The DNA has been meticulously sequenced. The last grainy photograph has been stripped of its power and filed away in the cold archives of explained phenomena. The silence from the depths is no longer a question. In the unassailable court of science, it is a verdict, delivered without ceremony and without appeal. We are left here on the cold, stony shore, in the quiet of this room, with the immense and hollow weight of that verdict. The monster, we are told with irrefutable certainty, is dead. More than that, it was never alive. It was a mistake, a shadow, a mass hallucination, a collective dream from which we have now been rudely and clinically awakened. But as the last echoes of the scientific argument fade into the Highland mist, a different kind of silence descends, a deeper and more profoundly unsettling quiet. And in that quiet, as we stare into the black, unblinking eye of the water, we can begin to sense that the death of the monster may be a more brutal, more significant, and more tragic event than its life ever was. What have we truly lost? On the surface, it seems like nothing more than a fiction corrected, a public delusion dispelled. A small, messy corner of the world has been tidied up, its chaotic, beautiful mystery swept away and replaced with the clean, well-ordered, and ultimately sterile certainty of fact. The world is safer, more predictable, more known. The map is complete. And yet, does it not feel incalculably smaller? Does the water of the loch, now officially devoid of its great secret, not seem somehow darker, more oppressive, and also profoundly emptier than it was before? The exorcism was a success, a triumph of the rational mind. But we are left with the distinct and deeply unsettling feeling that in casting out the demon, we have also inadvertently and irrevocably cast out an angel. We have lost the possibility of wonder. We have lost one of the last great monsters. The story of Loch Ness, in its final, modern chapter, is a tragedy. It is the tragedy of a disenchanted world. For the vast majority of human history, our species lived in a world that was alive, a world that was teeming with monsters, with spirits, with gods and demons. The forests were enchanted, alive with sly, ancient things that watched from between the trees. The mountains had souls, and to displease them was to invite an avalanche or a rockfall. The seas, vast and terrifyingly unknown, were the domain of krakens that could pull down a ship, of leviathans whose backs could be mistaken for islands, of serpentine beasts that coiled in the abyssal depths. These were not just fairy tales for children, they were an essential part of the human operating system. They were a sophisticated and poetic way of understanding the immense, often terrifying power of the natural world. A monster was a way of giving a face to the abyss, of personifying the dangers of the storm, the forest, and the deep water. It was a way of respecting the unknown, of acknowledging that humanity was not the sole, arrogant master of the world, but a small, fragile part of a much larger and much stranger whole. But the modern age, the age of reason, of enlightenment, of the scientific method, declared a total and unforgiving war on this world. It was a crusade of disenchantment. We lit up the darkness with electricity. We mapped the empty spaces on the globe until there were none left. We explained the thunder as atmospheric pressure, the tides as gravitational pull, the plague as a bacterium. We felled the sacred groves and built factories, and one by one we hunted our monsters to extinction, not with spears and harpoons, but with logic, with data, with the cold, hard steel of the null hypothesis. Nessie was perhaps the last of the great ones, a magnificent, prehistoric holdout that had somehow survived into the age of the motorcar and the telephone, only to be finally cornered, captured, and pitilessly dissected under the cold, bright, fluorescent lights of a laboratory. Its magnificent, terrifying body revealed to be made not of flesh and blood, but of misidentification, pareidolia, confirmation bias, and wishful thinking, and we have paid a steep, almost invisible price for our certainty. In proving, beyond a reasonable doubt, that there is no monster in the loch, we have also implicitly proven that our own senses are liars, that our most profound and reality-altering personal experiences can be dismissed as cognitive glitches, as firmware errors in the human brain. Think for a moment of the thousands of sincere, honest, ordinary people who have stood on that shore over the last 90 years and have seen something. A man on his honeymoon in the 1930s, his life forever changed by the sight of a long serpentine neck gliding through the water. A local farmer in the 1950s, a man who knows the loch better than his own hand, who sees a great humped shape moving against the current and can offer no earthly explanation. A respected priest in the 1960s, a man of God, who sees a colossal disturbance in the water that defies all logic. A child in the 1980s, her mind not yet clouded by skepticism, who sees a reptilian head break the surface for a fleeting, magical second. These were not people seeking fame or fortune. The vast majority of them reported their sightings reluctantly, often fearing ridicule. They were left not with a sense of triumph, but with a feeling of profound awe, a sense of having been chosen, of having been touched by a genuine, world-altering mystery. They were granted a glimpse behind the veil of ordinary reality and saw something impossible. And what is the response of the modern, rational world to these deeply personal, often life-changing testimonies? Science looks at these people and sees only data points of error. It sees flawed perception, overactive imaginations, a neurological susceptibility to suggestion. It strips their heartfelt testimony of all its power and meaning. It explains away their awe, and in doing so, it retroactively invalidates a fundamental part of their human experience. The brutality of the scientific conclusion is not just that it says the monster isn't real, it is that it implicitly, and with the immense authority of established fact, says to the witness, your experience isn't real. What you saw, what you felt, what shook you to the very core of your being was just a mistake, a phantom limb of the imagination. It is a profound and subtle form of gaslighting, performed not by a manipulative individual, but by an entire worldview. And in place of that sublime, terrifying, personal experience, what have we been given? The explanations, while logical, are profoundly, soul-crushingly unsatisfying. To be told that the breathtaking serpentine neck you saw rising from the water like a visitor from another epoch was, in fact, the head and neck of a swimming red deer is an act of cosmic bathos. To be told that the chain of colossal black humps you saw moving with inexorable power through the center of the loch was, in fact, a family of cormorants diving for fish in a sequential line is an insult to the majesty of the image in your mind. To be told that the great, chaotic churning of the water that suggested a leviathan surfacing from the abyss was, in fact, a minor seismic tremor releasing a large bubble of swamp gas from the lochbed is to have a moment of sublime terror replaced with a mundane geological footnote. The explanation is true, perhaps. It is logical. It is backed by evidence. But it is a truth that feels smaller, grayer, and infinitely less meaningful than the experience it seeks to explain. We have traded a world of terrifying, beautiful possibilities for a world of well-documented, but ultimately uninspiring certainties. Science has explained the magic trick, and in doing so has left the theatre feeling empty and dull. But the ghost of the monster, the spectre of the idea, still haunts us, precisely because we killed its physical form so thoroughly. The legend of Nessie no longer exists as a viable scientific question. That battle has been lost. It has now been transformed by the very forces that sought to destroy it into a cultural and philosophical one. The creature has become a powerful, potent symbol, a martyr for the cause of mystery itself. It represents a deep and abiding human resistance to the tyranny of the known, the arrogance of a civilization that believes it has an answer for everything. In our hyper-rational, data-driven, fully explained world, a world where every square inch of the globe is visible on a satellite image on our phones, a world where the mysteries of the genome are being unraveled and the secrets of the cosmos are being broadcast from deep space, Loch Ness has become one of the last great sanctuaries of the unknown. It is a nature preserve, not for a prehistoric animal, but for the human capacity for wonder itself. The scientific brutalism that sought to kill the monster has, in a final, beautiful irony, only served to reveal the incredible, obstinate resilience of belief. It has shown that even in the face of overwhelming, irrefutable, logical proof, the human heart will stubbornly, defiantly cling to the possibility of magic. We may know in the rational, logical parts of our minds that there is nothing there. But we go to the loch anyway. We drive the long, winding road. We stand on the cold, windswept battlements of Urquhart Castle. We book a ticket on a tourist boat with its comically oversized sonar display. We go not because we truly, logically expect to see a monster, but because we need to participate in the ritual of looking for one. The search itself has become the destination. It is an act of faith, not in a god or a creed, but in the possibility of the unknown. To stand on the shore of Loch Ness today and to scan the dark, inscrutable water is to perform a quiet, personal act of rebellion against the mundane. It is to say, I know what the data says, I know what the experts have concluded, I know what is logical and what is rational, but still, what if? That what if is the monster's final, indestructible, and most powerful form. It has evolved beyond the need for flesh and blood, beyond the constraints of biology and the fossil record. It is now a self-sustaining idea, an engine of wonder powered by our own deep-seated and inextinguishable need for it. The hoaxes, the fakes, the mistaken sightings, the inconclusive sonar blips, none of it matters anymore. In a strange and beautiful paradox, the systematic debunking of every piece of evidence has only made the core myth stronger. By freeing the monster from the clumsy, disappointing, and scientifically impossible burden of having to be a real physical creature, we have allowed it to become something far more powerful, far more enduring, a pure symbol. It is a symbol of the untamable, the uncategorizable, the thing that will always slip through the nets of our knowledge. It is the eternal question mark that lives at the bottom of the lake. And so we leave it there, in the cold, black, silent water, not as a plesiosaur, not as a giant eel, not as a mass hallucination, but as a guardian, a silent, ancient guardian of a truth that science can measure but never truly grasp. The truth that a world with monsters, or at least the lingering, shimmering possibility of monsters, is infinitely richer, more terrifying, more beautiful, and more alive than a world with none at all. The story of Loch Ness is not, in the end, the story of a creature. It is the story of a boundary line, the place where the neat, well-lit map of our knowledge ends and the great, dark, uncharted territory of our imagination begins. And the monster is the ancient, silent sentinel that stands watch on that border, its long neck raised not in aggression, not in curiosity, but in the form of a silent, eternal question mark. We may never have an answer, and perhaps, for the sake of our own souls, it is better that we do not. The real treasure of Loch Ness is not the creature that may or may not live in its depths. It is the search for it. And the search, we can be sure, will never, ever end. Let us now do something that the modern world, in its haste to debunk and categorize, rarely allows. Let us pause. Let us turn away from the sonar charts, the grainy films, the scientific papers, and the deathbed confessions. Let us set aside, just for a moment, the question of whether the creature is real. The reality of the evidence is a separate, colder story. We are here for a different kind of truth. We are here to confront the creature itself, the being that has haunted the human imagination for nearly a century. We are not here to hunt it, but to look at it, to truly see the thing that the witnesses described in their moments of stunned, adrenaline-soaked clarity. We must peel back the layers of affectionate folklore, discard the friendly, cartoonish Nessie of the tourist shops, and come face to face with the original entity, the biological enigma, the thing in the water. For the true, enduring creepiness of the Loch Ness monster lies not in its potential existence, but in the profound and terrifying wrongness of its physical form. It is a creature of contradictions, a living violation of natural law, a chimera whose every described feature seems designed to unsettle the deepest, most ancient parts of the human mind. Let us begin with the neck. For it is the neck that haunts us, the neck that defines the silhouette of our fear. It is the feature that burned itself into the global consciousness, thanks in large part to a celluloid hoax that, paradoxically, may have perfectly captured an archetypal terror. Imagine the scene, the one described over and over again. A vast, placid, unbroken sheet of black water stretching for miles under a heavy, grey Scottish sky. The world is horizontal, the line of the distant shore, the line of the water's surface, the lines of the clouds. And then, without sound, without warning, that perfect horizontal world is violated. A vertical element appears. A long, slender, serpentine neck rising silently from the depths. It is an act of profound unnaturalness. It is like a finger being pointed from a grave. The silence of its appearance is the first layer of its horror. There is no splash, no great disturbance. It does not erupt from the water like a whale. It simply is. One moment, the water is empty. The next, this impossible thing is there, occupying our world as if it has every right to do so. It suggests a mastery of its environment that is absolute and alien. It is the living periscope of a submerged and unknowable consciousness. Now, consider its form. It is most often described as being impossibly slender for its length, perhaps 10 to 15 feet long, but no thicker than a man's thigh. It has a reptilian or eel-like quality, yet it moves with a strange combination of fluid grace and stiff mechanical purpose. Witnesses speak of it turning its head, as if surveying the shore, but the head itself is a point of monstrous ambiguity. In many accounts, it is small, indistinct, a mere knob at the end of the long stem. It is often described as being featureless from a distance. There are no discernible eyes, no visible mouth. It is an organ of observation that refuses to betray the familiar signs of a face. This is deeply, profoundly uncanny. We are social primates, hardwired to seek out and read faces, to find emotion and intent in the eyes of another being. But this creature denies us that comfort. We feel ourselves being watched, being assessed by an intelligence that has no face, an intelligence whose motives and thoughts are therefore completely, terrifyingly opaque. It is the ultimate other, a being that sees us, but that we cannot, in any meaningful sense, see back. The texture of this neck, in the few close encounters reported, adds another layer of visceral dread. Some describe it as smooth, glistening, and eel-like, a skin of pure, cold muscle. But others, more unsettlingly, speak of a different texture, a skin that is not smooth, but wrinkled, leathery, corrugated, like the hide of an ancient elephant or the bark of a dead tree. This suggests not just age, but a corrupting, immense age, a being that has lived for thousands of years in the absolute cold and crushing pressure of the abyss, its skin growing strange and gnarled, a living record of its impossible lifespan. It is the texture of the crypt, of something that should have died eons ago but has somehow persisted, a living fossil not just in form but in its very substance. Its movement, too, is a study in contradictions. It is described as serpentine, yet it often holds itself ramrod straight. It is said to bend with a swan-like grace, yet it can also retract straight down, like a piston, vanishing in an instant. This biological paradox, this inability to move in a way that our minds can neatly categorize as reptilian or mammalian, adds to the deep sense of unease. It is a creature that does not play by the rules of our known world. But the neck, for all its iconic terror, is only a fragment. It is the part the creature deigns to show us. The true horror lies in what is attached to it, the immense, unseen, and often formless bulk that remains hidden in the black water. Let us now consider the body. In the rare sightings where more of the creature is revealed, it is almost never the sleek, streamlined, torpedo-like body of a plesiosaur. The descriptions are far more primal, more chaotic, more nightmarish. The most common image is that of the humps. A witness sees not one object, but a series of them, 2, 3, sometimes more, great, dark, rounded shapes breaking the surface in a line, moving in unison. They are like the coils of a colossal sea serpent, the tops of the loops visible as it swims just below the surface. Or they are like the back of some vast, ridged beast, a living mountain range moving through the water with inexorable power. This image strikes at a deep fear, the fear of the incomplete. We are seeing only parts of a whole, and our minds, in their frantic effort to complete the picture, conjure a creature of impossible, terrifying length. If these are merely the humps on its back, how vast must the full creature be? How deep must it go? Other descriptions are even more disturbing, for they speak not of a defined shape, but of a monstrous formlessness. Witnesses use words like a great dark mass, an upturned boat, a colossal slug. George Spicer, in his seminal 1933 land sighting, described a body with no visible limbs, a huge, lumbering thing that moved not by walking, but by a horrifying, undulating propulsion. This is a classic trope of cosmic horror, the terror of the amorphous, the protoplasmic, the being that lacks the comforting, familiar architecture of a skeleton and defined limbs. A shark is terrifying, but it is a known quantity. Its terror is functional, understandable. It has a head, fins, a tail, but a vast, slug-like mass that can somehow haul itself out of the water and across a road suggests something from a different, older, and more malevolent order of life. It is the horror of the primal ooze given sentient, predatory form. And how does this great mass move? The undulating, scenic railway motion described by Spicer and others is, from a biological standpoint, perhaps the most disturbing detail of all. No known vertebrate animal moves this way. Snakes and eels undulate horizontally. Whales and dolphins move their flukes vertically. Nothing in the known animal kingdom propels itself with a series of vertical waves passing down the length of its spine. It is a biological impossibility, a flagrant violation of the principles of anatomy and locomotion. And this is precisely why it is so terrifying. It means the creature is not just an unknown species, it is an unknown phylum. It is a being whose very method of existence is alien to our understanding of life on this planet. It is a living glitch in the system, a piece of code from another reality, and to witness it is to have your entire, comfortable understanding of the natural world shattered in an instant. The silence of this great body adds to its dread. A creature of such immense bulk should, by all rights, create a huge disturbance. It should churn the water into a frenzy, create a bow wave like a battleship. And sometimes it does. Many accounts speak of a powerful V-shaped wake, of the loch being turned to a boiling cauldron. But many others speak of the opposite, of a chilling, unnatural silence. They describe the humps rising and falling with barely a ripple, of the great mass gliding through the water as if it were a ghost. This suggests a creature so perfectly, so anciently adapted to its environment that it can move its colossal tonnage through the water with an efficiency that defies physics. It is a silent, effortless power that is far more intimidating than any noisy display of strength. It is the confidence of an apex predator that has had no rivals for millions of years. Now let us bring our focus closer. Let us imagine the skin. The sense of touch is one of our most primal, and the imagined texture of this creature is a source of profound revulsion. We have mentioned the eel-like smoothness and the ancient, wrinkled leather, but there are other, even more disturbing descriptions. Some witnesses speak of a skin that is wart-like, bristly, or fungoid. This is not the clean, hard scale of a reptile or the smooth skin of a mammal. This is the texture of decay, of corruption. It suggests a being that is not merely ancient, but sick with its own impossible age. A creature that has festered for eons in the absolute cold and pressure of the abyss, its skin becoming a home for strange, alien growths, a living tapestry of rot. Imagine the touch of such a hide, cold, rough, yielding, a texture that feels both alive and dead at the same time. And with this texture comes the smell. In a few rare, close-range encounters, witnesses have reported a foul, overpowering odor. It is not the clean, salty smell of a sea creature. It is described as a swampy, stagnant stench, a smell of ancient decay and wet earth, of rotting vegetation and something else. Smell is our most primal sense, the one most directly linked to the emotional centers of the brain. The scent of decay triggers a deep, instinctual revulsion in us, a biological warning of danger, of disease, of death. To have this smell associated with the creature is to ground its horror in a nauseating biological reality. It is not a clean, noble monster. It is a thing of filth and corruption, a being that carries the stench of its deep, dark, anaerobic grave with it whenever it rises to the surface. It is the smell of the abyss itself. What of the head? Even when a face is glimpsed, it is a mask of terrifying contradictions. The descriptions vary so wildly that they almost seem to be describing different animals. Some, like the famous land sighting by a veterinary student named Arthur Grant in 1934, describe a small, eel-like or snake-like head. Others, leaning into the plesiosaur theory, describe a more distinctly reptilian head. Still others, like the local man Alexander Campbell, spoke of a head that was big and puggy, more like that of a bulldog. And then there is the infamous gargoyle head photograph taken by the Rhines expedition, which, in its enhanced, ambiguous form, seems to show a horned, almost demonic visage with a gaping mouth. This very inconsistency is a source of its creepiness. Does it have a fixed form? Or is it, like the water horses of the old legends, a shapeshifter, a being whose appearance is mutable, tailored to the fears of the observer? Even when a distinct head is seen, the face is almost always a cipher. Eyes are rarely described with any clarity. They are either too small to be seen, or they are just dark, emotionless pits. This lack of a readable eye is profoundly disturbing. It denies us the ability to gauge intent. We are being stared at by a mind we cannot access, a gaze we cannot meet. The mouth, too, is a source of horror. When described, it is often a wide, lipless gash, a feature of pure predatory function, without the familiar, comforting context of a face. It is a maw, a portal into the creature's inner darkness. The combination of these features, the almost familiar shape of a head, but with a face that is a blank, emotionless mask, is a perfect recipe for the uncanny valley. It is not a monster that looks completely alien that scares us the most. It is the monster that looks just a little bit like something we know, but is hideously, fundamentally wrong. And finally, we must consider the appendages, the limbs that propel this impossible beast. The famous 1972 flipper photograph shows a large, rhomboid or diamond-shaped appendage, a shape that is not a perfect match for a plesiosaur's flipper, but is tantalizingly close. But this is contradicted by the majority of sightings, which, like Spicer's, insist that the creature has no visible limbs at all. This creates a horrifying question. How does it move? How does this colossal mass, this chain of humps, propel itself through the water with such speed and silence? The idea of a creature moving without any visible means of locomotion is deeply unsettling. It suggests a power that operates on principles we do not understand. Does it have unseen limbs, churning furiously just beneath the surface? Or does it move by some other, more alien method, a full-body undulation, a form of biological jet propulsion? The lack of visible limbs makes the creature seem even more like a force of nature than an animal, a living, sentient current in the water, a being of pure will and motion. Let us now try to synthesize these terrifying, contradictory parts into a single, cohesive whole. We have a creature with the neck of a serpent, the body of a colossal slug, the skin of a rotting log, the face of a featureless demon, and the limbs of a ghost. It is a biological paradox, a living chimera of mismatched parts, a creature that seems to have been assembled from the forgotten nightmares of a dozen different evolutionary paths. It is not one single kind of creepy, it is every kind of creepy at once. It is the slithering horror of the snake, the formless horror of the amoeba, the ancient horror of the fossil, the silent horror of the ghost, and the uncanny horror of the thing that almost looks like us but is not. This is why the creature of Loch Ness remains the undisputed king of cryptids, the most enduring monster of the modern age. It is not just an unknown animal, it is a perfect, living embodiment of the Freudian concept of the unheimlich, the unhomely, the thing that is strangely familiar yet terrifyingly alien at the same time. Its form is a catalogue of our deepest, most primal fears. The fear of the deep, the fear of the dark, the fear of being watched, the fear of being eaten, the fear of the formless, and the fear of the dead that will not stay dead. It is a walking, swimming violation of the natural order. It is a living glitch in reality, and that is its ultimate, its most profound, and its most enduring horror. It is the physical manifestation of a question mark, and the question it asks us as it rises silently from the black water is simple and terrifying. Are you sure you know how the world really works? The scientific reports are filed away. The sonar charts are gathering dust. The theories, both skeptical and hopeful, have been debated to the point of exhaustion. Let us now leave them behind. Let us quiet the noisy, argumentative world of proof and disproof and enter a more intimate, more terrifying space. We must now listen. We must listen to the voices, the hushed, trembling, and often reluctant voices of the people who were there, the people who saw it. For the true, cold, and enduring horror of the Loch Ness monster is not found in the abstract calculations of a biologist, but in the indelible, life-altering memories of the eyewitness. These are not just stories, they are scars on the psyche, moments of profound cognitive dissonance where the known world fractured and something impossible bled through. To listen to these accounts is to come face to face, not with a monster of myth, but with the raw, unprocessed terror of a human being forced to confront something that should not exist. Let us begin in the modern era, with the very sighting that lit the fuse of global obsession. But let us strip it of its quaint 1930s newsprint feel and feel the raw shock of the moment. It is July 22nd, 1933. George Spicer, a respectable Londoner, and his wife are driving on the new, modern road that hugs the northern shore of the loch. It is a bright, clear day. The world is solid, predictable, familiar. They are thinking about lunch, about the rest of their holiday, and then, as they round a bend, their comfortable modern world ceases to exist. There, in the middle of the road, perhaps 60 feet in front of them, is a thing. It is not an animal they can name. It is a living refutation of all known biology. Spicer's mind, in that first frozen second of disbelief, struggles to find a category, a label. He later says it was the nearest approach to a dragon or prehistoric animal that I have ever seen in my life. But that is a post hoc rationalization. In the moment, it is simply the thing. Imagine what they saw, a colossal, dark, featureless body lumbering across the tarmac. It has no legs, let that sink in. A land animal of immense size with no visible limbs. It moves with a hideous, rolling, undulating propulsion that is nauseatingly fluid and deeply mechanically wrong. The body is thick, slug-like, and seems to absorb the light. And from the front of this monstrous mass extends a long, thick, serpentine neck, held low, moving up and down in sickening waves. And in the very middle of this neck, it is carrying something limp and dark. A lamb, a dog, some unfortunate creature plucked from the hillside. Its brief, terrified life now reduced to a bloody morsel in the grip of an impossibility. The thing does not seem to notice them. It is not hostile. It is not frightened. It is simply passing through their world as a man might pass through a cloud of gnats, utterly indifferent to their existence. It moves with a slow, inexorable purpose. It slides across the road, its great dark bulk crashing through the bracken and undergrowth with a sound of immense weight. And then it is gone, vanished presumably into the silent, waiting blackness of the loch. The entire event lasts perhaps 20 seconds, but for the Spicers, it is an eternity. They are left in their silent, motionless car, the familiar road ahead of them now an alien landscape, their hearts pounding with a terror so profound it has no name. They have seen something that the human mind is not built to contain. They have seen a law of nature being broken. Now let us go to another land sighting, one that is less famous but perhaps even more viscerally terrifying. It is January 1934. Arthur Grant, a young veterinary student, is riding his motorcycle home late at night. The moon is bright, illuminating the road that runs close to the loch's shore near the village of Abriachan. He is a man of science, a man who understands anatomy, physiology, the rational order of the animal kingdom. As he rounds a bend, his headlamp catches something in the road ahead. His first thought is that it is a fallen tree, a common hazard. But then the tree moves. Grant swerves, nearly crashing his motorcycle, his mind reeling as he tries to process the image floodlit by his lamp. It is a creature of immense size with a huge, bulky, dark body. But what his scientific mind fixates on, what burns itself into his memory, are two features of absolute horrifying clarity. First, the head. It is small, almost comically so, in proportion to the great body, and it is utterly, completely serpentine. An eel's head or a snake's, atop a body of impossible bulk. It is a grotesque chimera, a creature assembled from the discarded parts of other, more natural animals. And then he sees the flippers. Two huge, dark, powerful flippers on the creature's right side. They are not the fins of a fish or the legs of a mammal. They are ancient, primeval paddles, tools of immense aquatic power, now being used with a clumsy, shuffling gait to haul the creature's mass across the tarmac. The combination of the sleek, serpentine head and the powerful, paddle-like limbs is a vision of such evolutionary madness that Grant's mind can barely contain it. The creature gives one last powerful shove with its flippers, its great body crashing through the heather and bracken, and plunges into the loch with a sound of immense displacement. Grant, his hands trembling, his scientific worldview shattered, stops and searches the area. He finds only crushed vegetation, a trail leading from the road to the water, a silent, physical testament to the impossible thing he has just witnessed. For the rest of his life, he will be haunted by that image, the tiny, eel-like head on the colossal body and the great, dark paddles of a creature that should have turned to stone 65 million years ago. The water, however, is the creature's true domain, and it is in the accounts of sightings from the loch itself that the horror becomes more intimate, more claustrophobic. Consider the story of the MacDonald family, local residents who, in the 1950s, were out in their small boat on a calm, clear day. They were in the middle of the loch, the water a sheet of black glass, the world silent and still. Suddenly, their boat began to rock violently, as if struck from below by a powerful force, and then, not 30 feet away, the water broke. It was not a head or a neck, it was a section of the creature's back. It was, as they later described it, a great, dark, arching hump, wider than their boat, its skin black and glistening like wet tar. It rose slowly, silently, water cascading from its sides, and on the surface of this skin, they could see things. Small, encrusting organisms like barnacles and patches of what looked like green, slimy algae. It was as if they were looking at a living reef, a piece of the ancient submerged landscape that had somehow come to life. The sheer, passive power of it was what terrified them. It did not seem to be swimming, it seemed to be surfacing, a vast subterranean object rising to greet the sun. It remained there for perhaps a minute, a silent, colossal, living island in the middle of the loch. And then, with a slow, deliberate movement that seemed to suck the very water in around it, it submerged, leaving the MacDonalds in their rocking boat, their minds struggling to comprehend the sheer, indifferent scale of the thing that had just shared the water with them. Or take the account of a man named Torquil MacLeod from the late 1960s. He was a lifelong resident, a fisherman who knew every current, every eddy, every trick of the light on the loch. He was a man who had laughed at the tourists and their monster stories. One evening, at dusk, he was tending to his nets near the shore when he heard a sound. It was not a loud sound. It was a soft, rhythmic, chuffing sound, like the slow, deep breathing of a very large animal. He looked out across the water, and in the fading light, he saw it. It was a long, dark shape, moving parallel to the shore. It was the humps, the classic three humps, rising and falling with a slow, graceful rhythm. But it was the head that transfixed him. It was held high, perhaps 10 feet out of the water, on a neck that was as thick as a telegraph pole. And it was looking at him. There was no doubt in his mind. The head was turned directly towards him, a small, dark silhouette against the darkening sky. He could not see its features, but he could feel its gaze. He felt a sudden, primal, electrifying fear, the fear of the prey animal that has just realized it is being watched by a predator. He felt in that moment that he was being assessed, measured, considered. The creature continued its slow, silent patrol, its gaze never leaving him. It moved past him, still breathing with that soft, rhythmic puffing, and then submerged, leaving him alone in the twilight, his skepticism shattered, replaced by a cold, creeping dread that would stay with him for the rest of his days. The creepiness of these accounts often lies in their strange, almost surreal details. In 1936, a group of schoolchildren on a hike saw a creature with two small, fleshy horns on its head, which seemed to twitch and rotate like ears. A man named John McLean in 1938 described a creature with a camel-like head and a distinct shaggy mane running down the length of its neck. This detail of a mane is surprisingly persistent, appearing in several independent accounts over the years. It adds a bizarre, mammalian quality to the otherwise reptilian creature, creating a hybrid that is even more unsettling. What kind of being has both the neck of a serpent and the mane of a horse? It is a creature that defies all our attempts to place it within the familiar categories of the natural world. And sometimes the horror is not in what is seen, but in the creature's interaction with the human world. In the summer of 1952, a woman and her son were having a picnic on the shore near Achnahanet. The boy threw a stick into the water for his dog. The dog, a boisterous terrier, plunged into the loch and began swimming after the stick. Suddenly, the dog began to yelp in terror. The woman looked up and saw the water behind the dog churning violently, as if something large was moving rapidly just beneath the surface. The dog, now frantic, turned and began swimming for its life back to the shore. The disturbance in the water followed it, a silent, fast-moving V-shaped wake closing the distance. Just as the dog scrambled onto the shore, a great, dark shape broke the surface exactly where the dog had been, before immediately submerging. The woman and her son were left with the terrifying conviction that their pet had been just seconds away from being taken by the creature. It had not just been swimming, it had been hunting. This predatory element is a recurring, if often downplayed, theme. The account of a water bailiff in the 1970s is particularly chilling. He was patrolling the loch in a small motorboat when he saw a large salmon leap from the water in a state of panic. A split second later, a huge, dark shape surged up from beneath it, its mouth open. The bailiff described the mouth as a great, pale gape, and he saw the salmon disappear into it before the creature crashed back beneath the waves. The event was over in a heartbeat, a moment of swift, brutal, natural predation. But the creature performing it was not natural. The bailiff was left with the image of that pale, gaping mouth, a portal into the abyss that had opened and closed in an instant. The most psychologically disturbing accounts, however, are those that suggest an intelligence that is not just predatory, but curious and even playful in a sinister, cat-like way. A man named F.W. Holliday, a dedicated researcher in the 1960s, was on the shore with a companion, both armed with cameras. They saw a large, black, slug-like object emerge from the water and begin to move rapidly. As Holliday raised his camera, the object immediately changed direction and submerged. A few moments later, it reappeared much further down the loch, as if to say, "You can't catch me." This happened several times. The creature seemed to be aware of their intentions, to be deliberately toying with them, revealing itself just enough to be seen, but never enough to be properly photographed. It was a game, but a game in which one player held all the cards. A game that highlighted the utter helplessness of the human observers in the face of the creature's superior awareness and mastery of its environment. It was a display not of shyness, but of a kind of arrogant, intelligent contempt. And finally, we must return to the most primal fear of all, the fear of being pulled down, the fear of the depths themselves. There are scattered, whispered accounts, the kind of stories that rarely make it into the official archives, from local boatmen and fishermen. Stories of anchor lines being suddenly and inexplicably pulled taut, as if snagged on something vast and moving on the bottom. Stories of unexplained massive sonar contacts that appear directly beneath a boat, linger for a few minutes, and then vanish into the depths. A story from two divers in the 1980s who were working on a pipeline in the murky water. One of them, through the gloom, saw a shape that his mind registered as a large rock. But then the rock moved. He described it as a great, dark brown, textured mass, the side of a house, that glided past him in the darkness, utterly silent. He never dived in the loch again. These stories speak to the terror of the unseen. The knowledge that in that cold, black, crushing void beneath you, something of immense size and power is moving, is aware of you, and is, for now, choosing to leave you alone. To listen to these accounts is to step out of the safe, well-lit world of scientific certainty and into a darker, more ambiguous and more frightening reality. These are not the ravings of madmen or the tall tales of hoaxes. They are the fragmented, terrified and utterly sincere testimonies of people whose lives were permanently altered by a brief encounter with the impossible. The true creepiness of the Loch Ness monster is not that it might be a prehistoric reptile. It is that it might be all of these things at once and none of them. It is a shapeshifter, a biological absurdity, a silent hunter, a malevolent trickster, a living piece of the abyss. The eyewitnesses did not just see an animal, they saw a rift in the fabric of reality, a living, breathing paradox, and they have spent the rest of their lives haunted by the memory of that impossible vision and by the cold, dark water that holds it.